Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Hope you had a great weekend. And today is the day in which we really do indeed select the President of the United States. I know some of you have said, well, I thought when I voted on November 8th and they announced that Donald Trump was the winner, that made it official. But it does not really become official almost technically till January. But today is, of course, the day of the Electoral College. We have 538 people who are supposed to meet in their respective state capitals and the District of Columbia. But it turns out that a few have said, well, we just have some questions. Let me just use my own state. For example, I'm broadcasting today from Texas. 38 electors are supposed to meet in Austin. One of them resigned, and then another has made it fairly clear that he's not going to vote for Donald Trump. So Donald Trump may only get 36 of the 38 electoral votes, which will then be ratified in January. So I thought for just a few minutes we'd talk about that, and I'd love to get your comments. Now, having heard all the hue and cry about the Electoral College and even some of the attempts to change some of the votes that will be taking place today, if you'd like to join us as we have this conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Reading from the New York Times, they say that, of course, today, 538 people will meet to determine the next president, and, of course, that number won't be quite as high because the Electoral College just shy of 6 weeks. Trump, who lost the popular vote but is projected to win most electoral votes. Get your thoughts about this. And Obama described the Electoral College as a vestige. So Clinton won the popular vote but lost the Electoral College vote. Whether or not there will be an even more significant attempt to change that, but that's the rule that we have right now. You might say, well, who are these electors that will be meeting in the various state capitals? Well, again, the New York Times reminds us that, in short, the electors are people chosen by their state political parties to cast votes for president and vice president. Electors can be state party officials or elected. For example, Bill Clinton cast a vote for his wife, and the number of electors, representatives in each state, added to it the number of senators, and then 3 additional, hence the number 538. You, of course, as I have said before, could come up with a 269, 270 to actually 306, but you can begin to subtract, as I just Texas and some others elsewhere to begin to see whether or not he will get that 270. And of course, you would have to come up with 37 people who would change their mind. As I mentioned, we already have identified 2 in Texas. There's a few others, but to come up with an additional 35, pretty tough to do. But if indeed that were to be the case, and neither Donald Trump nor Hillary Clinton would get the requisite 270 votes, then this would go to the House of Representatives, and then each state would have 1 vote. And since you have more states that have a Republican representation than Democratic representation, still pretty obvious. This is another little footnote of his out there on Facebook, as I did the other day, who the next president is. Well, it is. And that is, of course, interesting things will happen. They look very similar to the kind of stamp of the state. And then
And then what is a certificate of the vote? Or in most national records, a little bit of something so the campaign in a lot more different areas. But you might say, why does it take so long? College was developed in, first of all, the 19th century, a need to make sure that you had, and then you would come to the state capitol to ratify that vote. Then you would take it to Washington, D.C., and given the fact that we did not have email, it was probably a good thing to take a little bit longer. And remember, up until fairly recently, the president did not take office until March. Now, of course, we might want to speed this up a little bit more, but still there was a concern, and I think a wise one, to say that the vote should be ratified by the incoming Congress. But I think that's right, in which that will be ratified, and then, of course, sworn into office. So that you to recognize popular vote results in their and not vote for Donald binds electors to vote a particular way. There are some state laws that bind them to vote according to the popular vote outcome of the state. Others are bound by more informal pledges of their party. Under some state laws, so-called faithless electors who vote against their state's results will be fined or even disqualified and replaced. No, every elector has voted. The Supreme Court has not weighed constitutional. And then, okay, here's the date here. I was ahead of it. The actual votes will be tallied on Friday, January 6th at 1 p.m. That's where members of both the House and Senate will meet in the House. Parting president of the Senate is expected to preside over the. Then Mr. Biden will declare the winner. And then drama surrounding under siege. And very meet, and we next questions 135. This is Christmas week, and I thought it might be worthwhile to. Written in 1867 by Philip Brooks, an Episcopal pastor from Philadelphia. He was in Israel 2 years earlier and had celebrated Christmas in Bethlehem. Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. Above thy deep and dreamless sleep, the sunlight, the hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee. That day was just like any other day for the people in Bethlehem. Grew quiet, and something remarkable. The angels keep their watch of wondering love, just spiritual realities around it. But most other people were unaware of the fact that the most significant event in history was taking place. God became man. But he was born in a stable and laid in a feeding trough. There was no pomp. He took upon himself the sins of the world, paid the ultimate penalty that we deserve to pay, that we might have everlasting life. During this Christmas week, I hope you'll stop long enough to consider what happened in that little town of Bethlehem. But even more so, I hope you will think about what Jesus did for you on Calvary. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Today is the day in which the Electoral College meets, in which electors on all the different states, including the District of Columbia, supposedly 538, although we've had some dropouts, will actually meet. And whether it's in Austin, Texas, or Tallahassee, Florida, whether it's Albany, New York, or Sacramento, California, wherever that might be, we're going to. We won't know what all of those might be. Some of those are secret. Most of them are public, and we'll have a pretty good idea. But then I was talking about this ratification, which will take place on Friday, January 6th at 1 p.m. And both the House and Senate meet together. The so-called president of the Senate, who is also the vice president, will be Joe Biden, in which he will first of all preside over the count, and then we will see each one of the votes in alphabetical order, and then you will have Joe Biden declare the winner based upon the majority of those votes. You would hope that he would simply announce that and not make any comments. We've had perhaps a couple of awkward situations. There have been 3 different times in which the sitting vice president has announced his own defeat. The most recent one happened in 2001, in which Vice President Al Gore announced that George W. Bush was the next president of the United States. Now, there's something else I thought I would add to this. Given the controversy of this election season, there is a couple of other procedural issues that might surface, and that is, after that announcement, Vice President Joseph Biden will ask if there are any objections. Now, you, in the past, have seen this as been a formality. It is perfunctory, but this case, maybe not, because then you might have some challenges. You could see possibly somebody on the Republican side challenging, and we're going to talk about just a minute, like Chris Suprin, who is one of those individuals who has lost an attempt to reject Donald Trump, and we'll talk about him and some of the others in just a minute. Or, I think even more likely, it could be a Democrat that would say, we are convinced that this has been a rigged election because of Russian influence. And so the objections, of course, have to be in writing. They have to be signed by at least one member of the House and one member of the Senate. I don't think that would be too difficult on either side of the aisle to get that. And if there are any objections, then the House and Senate will immediately then split up to consider them and have 2 hours to decide whether or not they support that objection or not. So this might be a little bit more unusual as well. Back in 2001, of course, the objection could have been that the Supreme Court stopped the vote too quickly, and that 538 votes total that George W. Bush had over Al Gore in Florida should be reconsidered, but that one really would have looked like kind of sour grapes, and so it didn't amount to very much. But this time, the intensity is so much greater that I think there's at least a theoretical possibility, we'll see how it plays out on January 6th, that this would force the Congress to actually consider this. So far, though, Congress has never sustained an objection to an electoral vote, at least in the modern times. But this is not your typical year, as I think most of us realize. Which brings me to another piece, and that is this piece that came out in Politico, talking about the fact that members of the Electoral College have been inundated by harassing phone calls and hate mail, and some have even received death threats. So again, we're talking about those individuals, those 538 presidential electors, who in the past were not even that well known. I know that sometimes I've gone to state conventions where somebody has talked about being an elector. We've even had individuals on this program that have been electors, but it's always been sort of just a perfunctory, straightforward kind of vote. It hasn't had much controversy surrounding it, but this year is very, very different. Again, reading from Politico, it says, in the aftermath of a uniquely polarizing presidential contest, the once anonymous electors are squarely in the spotlight, targeted by death threats, harassing phone calls, and reams of hate mail. One Texas Republican elector said he's been bombarded by more than 200,000 emails. Another elector from Michigan said, I never can imagine harassing people like this. He says, I've lost a bunch of business because he runs a home inspection service. And when people find out that he is actually a Republican elector and is going to vote for Donald Trump in the state of Michigan, that was enough for a lot of people to make sure that they would never do business with him again. Now, the Politico goes on to say, in recent decades, the Electoral College has become such a reliable rubber stamp of Election Day results that it was viewed as an afterthought. But with many Democrats desperate to block the all but certain ascension of Donald Trump to the White House, this long neglected body has been gripped by turmoil, and its members have been subjected to pleas to upend centuries of tradition by casting their votes for someone other than the president-elect. There have been ad campaigns targeting electors and op-eds assailing their role. One Democratic member of Congress has called to delay the vote for president while an investigation of Russian involvement in the election is underway. Two others have pleaded with electors to consider Russia's role when deciding how to vote. Progressive groups are preparing protests across the country at sites where the electors will meet to cast their ballots. Personal contact information for many electors has been posted publicly, which you sort of know. When you get 200,000 emails, obviously that has been the case, and has been used to bury them with massive email campaigns. Then last week, of course, we saw the release of a video. This had celebrities like Martin Sheen and others pleading with Republican electors to vote for someone other than Trump. And on Saturday, Unite for America, the group behind the video, began sending personalized versions to electors in which Sheen and more than a dozen others call them out by name. Never have seen anything like this before. So the body's 306 Republicans have faced the most acute pressure of all. Several, like this one individual, said they receive thousands of emails a day from anti-Trump advocates, much of it auto-generated from forms available online. Others say they have been receiving pressure from national Republicans and the Trump campaign to make sure that they remain loyal. This has never like this happened before. Then let's talk about one of these electors that we actually have interviewed here on Point of View, Alexander Kim. He said the Trump campaign is calling, the Republican Party of Texas is calling, they're trying to lock down the votes, and he says he's received 30 such calls as well. One Republican National Committee insider said he called him 3 times in 1 hour to get a response. Unbelievable. And, of course, then Politico goes on to say there's a reason electors like Kim make Republicans nervous. While he insists he's voting for Trump when the body meets on Monday and that nothing can shake him from that position, there's a caveat, quote, unless Trump does something to violate the compact he created with American citizens, unquote. Just that eyelash of doubt, Kim suspects, had led to a barrage of calls from the party. And so you can see that we're dealing with all sorts of issues that seemingly, again, are unprecedented. This presidential campaign, the presidential election have been unprecedented. I guess we should expect that the Electoral College will be unprecedented as well. And that brings us to one other individual before we take a break, and that is an individual by the name of Chris Suprin of Texas, the only GOP elector to publicly oppose Trump, has been especially battered by criticism, mainly from fellow Republicans, including party leaders who have questioned his integrity. He announced his intention to vote for someone other than Trump in a New York Times op-ed, recalling his service on 9/11 as a first responder to the attack on the Pentagon. Then on Friday, a Texas television station, that would be WFAA Channel 8, ran a story accusing him of inventing his 9/11 role, the story that he built his career around. The charge, based upon a discrepancy in his LinkedIn page, featured a former colleague accusing him of stolen valor. And, of course, then he has denied the story. He's the only Republican in a coalition of 10 electors who have launched a desperate, long-shot effort to convince GOP electors to reject Trump. They need, as I mentioned just a minute ago, at least 36 more to join them in order to prevent Donald Trump from earning enough support to be officially elected president. And if they were to succeed, the election, as I pointed out, would be thrown to the House of Representatives for a final vote. This is unprecedented, and I would love to get your comments. So let's open up the phones, give you a chance to comment on not only the Electoral College, but the tremendous amount of pressure that has been brought to these various electors. As Politico calls it, electors under siege. When we come back, we'll take some of your phone calls, but also talk about how this was supposed to be such a peaceful transition of power. Remember when there was such controversy when Donald Trump didn't immediately say in one of those debates that he would accept the results of the election? They didn't ask that question of Hillary Clinton, and at the time I said they should have asked her, because it's been her supporters that would never accept Donald Trump, and that's, of course, exactly what's taken place. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back with more right after this.
More than 2,000 years ago, God entered the world through his Messiah, and today he calls us to be the light of the world, to reflect his grace and truth to everyone around us. Your support for Point of View can equip more than 1 million people to be the light, and we have a way right now to double the brightness of every dollar you give, up to $70,000. You know what that means. If you give $50, it means $100 to Point of View. Every gift gets doubled, whether it's $20 or $20,000. Make that gift now. Shine your light. Click the banner at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151 or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Be the light and let our matching fund double your shining. Pointofview.net, Box 30, Dallas 75221, and 1-800-347-5151. Thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Electoral College Day, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Just going through some of the history, and again, this has been an unusual year. Electors under siege. Some actually perhaps will vote against the wishes of their state. And if they are fined, I've heard Michael Moore and others said they'll pay the fine, but it is just an unusual world that we find ourselves in. And again, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, unprecedented. Another piece that came out just recently, this one's from NBC News. Jane Tim said that in the aftermath of a wild, norm-busting 2016 campaign, it's only fitting that Monday's Electoral College vote, the next step in formalizing Donald Trump's election to the presidency, has generated frenzied, star-studded arguments to somehow change the results. But regardless of whether you view these efforts as proper and legitimate uses of constitutional authority, sour grapes are just democracy's version of a primal scream therapy. Don't expect any reversal of November's overall result. The weeks since the election have seen an unprecedented number of headlines teasing various scenarios about changing the results of the Electoral College. Those 538 members meeting today in 50 state capitals and the District of Columbia. Trump won the Electoral College 306 votes to 232. But again, a handful of Democrats and even fewer Republican electors have embarked on an unusual effort to deny Trump the victory, or at the very least, raise the specter of changing the election. Electors in 3 states have gone to court seeking to change the opportunity to vote their mind. Another resigned to avoid the vote altogether. And of course, as I mentioned just a minute ago, one Republican elector in Texas has publicly stated that he will not vote for Trump, although his state voted overwhelmingly for the Republican candidate. We'll get into some more aspects of that in just a minute, but of course, as we go along, I'd love to get some of your comments, so let's, if we can, take a few of those. 1-800-351-1212. Let's go first to Georgia on the Good News Network. Danny, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, I was just wondering about how's a man still free to vote if we have certain people make our vote for us?
So again, what you're saying is if they are free to do so, then we thought we were voting for people who pledged to vote, right?
Right.
And this is the concern. The argument is being made right now that the reason Alexander Hamilton in particular, but also James Madison and John Jay and some of those who wrote the Federalist Papers and the others of the Constitutional Convention created the Electoral College is to provide some flexibility. That is, there's always the possibility the candidate could die before he or now she takes office, so that would give the electors a chance to change some things. It would also be the possibility that if you were to elect an individual through the popular vote that was unqualified and the people did not understand that, the electors would have a little more knowledge to do so. So I guess there is some wisdom in not always making them always hold to their pledge. But if you don't have them hold to their pledge, then, Danny, those of you in Georgia, for example, that voted for Donald Trump would expect your electors to go to Atlanta and vote today for Donald Trump. And if you don't, you begin to wonder how valuable your particular vote was, wouldn't you?
Yes, sir. But I thought every one of our votes was that we cast to begin with was already done and final. I didn't know we were going to have another round of votes going, though.
Well, again, this is one of the things we're learning. Before, it was always kind of straightforward. It was just routine. It wasn't that controversial. But this year, it is really controversial, and this is exactly why you have had some of these individuals receiving over 200,000 emails. Now, again, those numbers just come off the top of my head. But just can you imagine if you even got 100 emails tomorrow? You would wonder what in the world happened. And just imagine that you would get more than 100 every single day, and you would just be overwhelmed and be offended that your personal privacy had been so invaded. And so this is something that we once again have to lay at the feet of some of these progressive groups who are doing things that are, as I've said before, completely unprecedented. So I'd love to get your comments about those actions, and we'll talk a little bit about how this was supposed to be just a peaceful transition of power. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Arkansas next. Richard, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. I'm pretty much concurring the same as it sounds here. And once again, they always talk about one of the greatest things you have is your vote and the right to vote. And here we go. These electors should not have an option. They're there to represent the people. And if that's not true, Congress needs to change the law where they're committed to it and have to do it this way.
I would agree.
That's by the law.
Yeah. And
because otherwise our vote does not count.
Yeah. I mean, after all, when I cast my vote, I recognized in Texas I was voting for an elector. I was not voting for a presidential candidate, but nevertheless, I expected that of the 38 electoral votes that we were sure were going to go for Donald Trump, whether I voted or not. We knew those 38 would go to Donald Trump. We now know that at best 36 of those 38, and I may be missing some right here in the state of Texas. I could do probably the same thing in the state of Arkansas, and you multiply that by enough for states, and we may have, again, one of these sort of semi-constitutional crises where the American people, using the system we have, the Electoral College, were denied that opportunity because some of the electors decided to change their vote. And the argument that's made on the other side is well, they need to because this individual is not a legitimate candidate. And so it just shows you that even after the election, when we were assured that there would be a so-called easy and peaceful transition of power, we see the amount of time, energy, and money that have been spent to try to create enough of these faithless electors so that it would throw the whole debate into the House of Representatives. And I don't think that's going to happen. Matter of fact, there's pretty good evidence that it won't. But you never want to say never in this election season. It's been the craziest one I've ever seen.
Yeah, the thing about it is that elector is not going there. It's not supposed to be a personal issue with them. They're there to represent the people, the voters of that particular state.
I certainly agree.
And not their own personal views. And one other thing to throw in here, if I'm out of line on the question here, please just say stop.
Yeah,
and that's
okay.
The hacking of the voting system they're talking about. My wife and I both, and everybody I know, we disagree with electronic voting machines.
I do too.
There's no, and this is a good example of it right here, there's no paper trail to follow. I think we need to eliminate all of the electronic voting machines because they can be hacked. It's a computer. Anybody, it's going to have to be Russia. It could be somebody here in Harrison, Arkansas, Alpena, Arkansas, some no-name city anywhere could hack into the system and change the votes. But with a paper trail of a paper voting ballot, you don't have this issue.
Yeah, well, when they talk about recounts, which they started in places like Wisconsin and Michigan and never bothered in Pennsylvania, how do you recount an electronic vote? Now, again, most people still vote using optical scanners, and so you do have a paper trail, and I completely agree with you. I've said this before, that once you begin to move into this kind of digital electronic world, a hack could take place, but more importantly, you just don't have a paper trail. And so there are all sorts of things that could happen. And why trust it to that? We can be at least old-fashioned in one area, and that is to have a paper trail. And when you have these optical scanners, or of course, remember we have the hanging chads in Florida. I don't want those. At least you then have a pretty good idea of how the vote was, and you can go back and do the necessary recounts because we've had some really close elections. So, Richard, I'm with you 100%.
Yeah. And the other thing is, let's go back to what America's founded on, Christian principles.
It's all good.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello is right. Richard, thank you for calling today. Hope you call back again.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Let's take a break. We have a lot of calls, as you might imagine, and I just wanted to give you a chance to kind of weigh in on this day in which we are really, in a sense, electing the President of the United States, because those electors, some of whom have already cast their ballots, others will shortly, and then those will be reported to the House of Representatives and the United States Senate on Friday, January 6th. And that's where the Vice President, the outgoing Vice President, Joe Biden, will actually, as the departing President of the Senate, preside over the count. Each state's votes will be open and announced in alphabetical order, and then he will announce the next President of the United States. So those are some important action items that are going to take place. And one of the calls here wanted to talk about how do we choose the electors. Since I'm up on a break here, I'll come back and answer that question. Then I see a few more of you want to talk a little bit more about the Electoral College, so we'll stay on this topic as I planned, because it used to be that December 19th, or whenever the Electoral College met, was just sort of a straightforward, routine announcement we would make here on Point of View. But things have changed. This has been the most unusual election in modern times, and I guess we shouldn't be surprised that it's been the most unusual Electoral College vote in modern times. Let's take a break. We'll come back with your calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Livingston Christian School entered into an agreement with Brighton Church of the Nazarene to use its church building to house the school. But Livingston Christian first needed a permit from Genoa Township, the local government in charge. The permit application received the support of the township's planning commission and community development director, as well as the township's hired consultants, who concluded that the amendment would be consistent with the overall goal of the township's plans to accommodate a variety of land uses. Several members of the local community even spoke in favor of Livingston Christian's plans. Nevertheless, the township board denied the application without explanation. With that denial, Livingston Christian had nowhere else to go within Genoa Township. The township's decision had effectively barred them from pursuing their religious mission anywhere inside Genoa Township. Livingston Christian sued the township under the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, but a federal district court in Michigan held that the free exercise of Livingston Christian's religion had not been substantially burdened by the township board's decision. First Liberty Institute and its volunteer attorneys at Covington and Burling have appealed the court's decision to the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. Federal law expressly prohibits the government from using zoning laws to keep religious institutions out of their town. We hope the Sixth Circuit will agree. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. The Electoral College meets today, and we've been talking about some of those issues. One of the questions that was asked off air was, how do they choose these electors? And in many states, and I'll just use the state of Texas where I've seen this happen before, you actually have one elector for each congressional district. So it makes it pretty simple there, and that is that when you get together in your state Republican Party, your state Democratic Party, you then, in your particular congressional district, select one individual there who will go as an elector to Austin on December 19th. In most cases, these tend to be party faithful. These tend to be individuals that people within that congressional district, oftentimes within that county, they know that individual and they know that this is a person that maybe even ran and was elected to be the elector in that particular congressional district. Now, there are also, of course, some extras because you have two others that are senators, and so you, in many cases, will have somebody of prominence. For example, Bill Clinton is an elector and meeting today in Albany, New York, and will cast his vote as an elector for his wife, Hillary Clinton. Nancy Pelosi's daughter has been in the news because she actually has been leading some of these electors in California to contact other electors and tell them not to vote for Donald Trump. So they have some prominence. Some that came into national prominence were this African-American father and African-American daughter, who will be, I think, the first time that a father and daughter will actually, as a combo, vote as electors. And they're in the state of Michigan. Actually, they live in they're going to Lansing, Michigan, as you might imagine. And they have actually received death threats and had people call them hateful bigots. This is the kind of response that many of these electors are receiving, especially in some of the states that were expected to go towards Hillary Clinton and instead went for Donald Trump. So this particular father-daughter combo that will be voting today in Lansing, Michigan, they're both African-American, will still not feel real comfortable driving back home because there have been death threats against them. And so it illustrates, again, the tremendous controversy that surrounds the Electoral College this year compared to previous years. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to California, KYCC, and Gail. Thank you for joining our conversation.
Hey, good morning. A couple of comments on this whole craziness. For one thing, isn't it almost a federal offense to put forth death threats and that kind of thing to the Electoral College? I mean, these people need to be saving these emails, and the FBI needs to really investigate this.
Let's hope so. Well, I really do hope so.
I mean, seriously. Yes. And as far as the other side whining and complaining like a bunch of little babies, I mean, right up until the morning of, the polls were neck and neck for Hillary and Trump. She's got nothing to whine about except the fact that she couldn't buy herself an election. That's how I feel about it. And I do live in a crazy state of California. Unfortunately, we have to obey if we didn't have San Francisco and LA, we'd be conservative. I can put it that way. And then our state would matter, instead of all the craziness. But this whole thing, I am so sick of it all, and the Russians and everything else. It's like, what else can they pull out of their hat? Okay, next week it'll be the Koreans, and then it'll be the Chinese, and it's just going to go on and on and on and on. And I'm sorry, but Michelle Obama, disgraceful, what she said in her interview with Oprah. I am really appalled by her and her husband and what he has said against our president-elect Donald Trump. And that's where I will end it. And thank you for taking my call.
Gail, appreciate your phone call. 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Oklahoma. Rob, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Can you hear me?
I certainly can hear you. Go for it.
Well, yes, sir. I've been a Christian all my life, and of course, I was really disappointed with the election because I still can't wrap my mind around any good Christian or even evangelical voting for Trump. I mean, he's proven he's anything but, and now these people are complaining about this, like that last lady. Well, when the CIA and the FBI said they are confident that Russia influenced the election, that's got to be taken serious.
Yeah, and I would just clarify that, say that at least we have the CIA making that comment. We haven't heard from the FBI yet.
Oh, yes, they have. 2 days ago, they joined in with them.
Well, no, you had Mr. Brennan saying that, but I'd like to hear the FBI say it. But again, both the Republicans and Democrats have said they really need to investigate that. And in some respects, I've said before, welcome to the table. We've been concerned about this for some time. How many times have we talked about the concerns about hacking, the concerns about voter integrity? I'm, kind of glad to see some people saying that we need to investigate this. We still have a system that is an embarrassment. I can, as I've said before, go almost anywhere in the world and go to an ATM machine, and they can figure out it is me, and they can figure out how much money I have in my account and give me the right amount, and they never make a mistake. And we have mistakes all the time with everything from voting machines to the possibility of outside influence and hacking. There's a lot of good reasons to have that investigation. So I welcome it, and we see, I think, both Republicans and Democrats calling for that. So good point. Let's go to Missouri, KNEO. Ann, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi. I just wanted to point out I am a committee woman for one of the precincts here in southwest Missouri, and I read a book several years ago, and it was talking about the most important political position you could be in is at your local precinct level. And people just don't realize that it's a working up process. Those delegates that go and vote for the Electoral College have come from some local precinct originally. And we Christians particularly, we've had our heads in the sand for several years. Like in 1979 when Jimmy Carter's administration, pulled the education department away from the states, put it at the federal level. I don't know what I was doing at that time, had my head in the sand. But we just need to get involved at the precinct level so that we understand a little better how this process works.
I would certainly agree. Well, and it's really good. And since we're coming to a break, those of you online, if you hold on, I will get you on as soon as we come back from the break. But let me just mention that for a minute. It's a good advertisement, if you will, for getting involved in precinct politics, because it doesn't involve much of your time. But as I've said, when we have the next election, you get a chance to vote twice. That is, you vote in your election, and then you can go to your precinct meeting and vote again. And so whether it is a state convention or a national convention, your resolutions and the votes that you take will actually have a difference. And it is so important to recognize that we really don't have a national election. We have a series of state elections, and those state elections are very important, but also are really built upon these precincts and these counties. And so if you want to know how to get involved in the political process in the future, go to your precinct meeting. And again, I recognize some people want to be independents, but if you go to either the Republican precinct meeting or the Democratic precinct meeting, then you have an opportunity to be involved at the grassroots. And that's really, in some respects, the farm team. I know individuals that are now very involved in the state level and in even congressional elections that started out simply working in the precinct. So as Ann points out, that's the place to get involved. And for those of you that say, well, how do they choose an elector? Just go to a precinct meeting and then go to your county meeting, and then maybe you'll even get a chance to go to your state meetings. And when you go to a state convention, you actually see how they choose those electors, and you'll know a lot more about the process. So we'll continue our conversation. Today, it's a special day, December 19th. The Electoral College is meeting. Got all sorts of questions to put on the table, and we'll come back and take some more of those phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
More than 2,000 years ago, God entered the world through his Messiah. And today he calls us to be the light of the world, to reflect his grace and truth to everyone around us. Your support for Point of View can equip more than 1 million people to be the light. And we have a way right now to double the brightness of every dollar you give, up to $70,000. You know what that means. If you give $50, it means $100 to Point of View. Every gift gets doubled, whether it's $20 or $20,000. Make that gift now. Shine your light. Click the banner at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151 or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Be the light and let our matching fund double your shining. Pointofview.net, Box 30, Dallas 75221. And 1-800-347-5151. Thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Today is the day when 538 people supposedly are to go to their state capitals or to the District of Columbia and vote for the president. And this is election day in one real sense, because the Electoral College makes it official. Now, the reason I said supposedly is we already know some that will not go, others that will not vote according to what their state requires. And so we will see how that plays out. And then those decisions that are made today, those votes that are made today, will then be ratified on Friday, January 6th at 1 p.m. when both the House and the Senate meet together. And it will be presided over by the departing president of the Senate. That would be Vice President Joe Biden, in which each state's votes are opened and announced in alphabetical order, and then Joe Biden will announce the winner of the presidential election. And this in the past has been just sort of straightforward, routine, perfunctory, but anything but. And as we talked about in the last hour, we've had a number of electors under siege, in part because some have not been willing to accept the decision that came down on November 8th. Derek Hunter put it this way. He says, just go back to not so long ago, October 19th, when Donald Trump would not give in to Chris Wallace, the moderator of the final presidential debate, on the question of whether he would accept the results of the election. In the few remaining weeks of the campaign, that became one of the most talked about moments of the entire year-long ordeal. Little did we know the moment would come into play more than a month after all the votes were counted. Derek Hunter points out that Hillary Clinton wasn't asked the question herself, but she never stopped feigning outrage from the moment forward at the concept. Not to the concept of her team committing the very offense she horrified, but the idea that this oafage Donald Trump would not accept those. And I remember at the time, back in October 19th, the day after, saying, you know, they really asked the wrong person the question. Because, yeah, I'm sure we probably get some of those kinds of tweets we get from Donald Trump so often, and I really need to take the Twitter account away from him, but that's a different story. But I just said at the time, the people that were really challenging the candidates were on the other side. They were saying that Donald Trump is not a legitimate candidate. Donald Trump is not going to be the president. And I said, what if? And, of course, it was much more hypothetical back then. What if, for example, Donald Trump did win? I think you're going to have much more outrage from the Democratic side than you would from the Republican side. Some of the progressives, those are the ones that were in the streets, actually, and the Donald Trump rallies. Those are the ones that look like they would be the ones that, after an election of Donald Trump, would go out into the streets and actually destroy property. And it sort of happened that way, didn't it? And so Derek Hunter concludes that in the ensuing weeks, there's been nary a Clinton campaign veteran who hasn't been grousing and making public statements about a rigged election or a variety of other issues. You can go through the long list, you know, whether it was James Comey, whether it was sexism, whether it's the Russians. And, of course, we'll have to get some investigation there. So, nevertheless, we find ourselves in a situation where some of these electors have received death threats. Some of them have received up to 200,000 emails telling them to change their vote. And so today we'll see how much of that public campaign is actually
going to come to fruition as, again, those individuals go to their state capitals today. Some of them have already done so. Others will do later and actually vote for the individual that will be the next president of the United States. Let's go back to the phones and give some of you a chance to join the conversation. 1-800-351-1212. In Georgia, WAGP. Larry, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kerby. I just almost had this call because I remember that we were called deplorable and really criticized and ostracized because of the fact that we happened to differ in opinion with some of these bottom feeders that put on, we pay to entertain us, and now they're supposed to be giving us all of our advice on how we should vote and how we should live. And I just find that to be kind of a strange thing that the terrorists seems to be the ones that were talking about us for being the what they call us now, the redneck hillbillies and all sorts of things in some states. And another thing is that the White House has not come out and said anything, to say this is wrong, which makes me believe they're in favor of it. I mean, they're not trying to stop it, so obviously they want this to go on. At very worst, they agree with it, and that's just, to me, it's kind of like, well, maybe you're a part of it. If you're in agreement with it, you must be part of it.
Well, do this as a thought experiment. There was a time about 3 weeks before the election where, when people started counting the votes, they said we might have an unusual situation in which Hillary Clinton will win the electoral vote, because we know she's going to win Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, which she didn't, and North Carolina, which she didn't. But Donald Trump may just pick up so many enthusiastic supporters from the South and Midwest that he'd actually win the popular vote. And just imagine then if this was reversed and Hillary Clinton won the electoral vote, Donald Trump won the popular vote, and now imagine there's some kind of Republican machine out there, and I don't know who that would be because there's no one on the Republican side, kind of like a George Soros or some of those, but just imagine it for a moment, that's now intimidating all the Democratic voters in some of those states like North Carolina or Michigan or something like that. I think the White House would have said something about that, don't you think? I mean, if it was the other way around, I would think so. Maybe I'm missing something here.
No, I think you're correct. I think that the White House would have been on top of it, and probably all the electors would have had a bodyguard of some type to it.
I also think the media would have covered it. I heard Rush Limbaugh say this the other day, and I really haven't traced this down, but he says if you were to read the New York Times and the Washington Post only, and that's all you had, you might not even know what I shared in the first hour about the number of electors under siege, because you just some of that just didn't get reported. And that's amazing to me, because this is unprecedented. I mean, the next time I go to a state convention and they say, who wants to be an elector, they're going to be some going to say, I'm not sure I want to put my hand up this time. I see what happened to Sue or Bob or Joe, or in my case, Candy, and saying, I don't know if I want to go through this again. I don't want my business to suffer because I'm going to actually follow the rules of our party convention. So it will be interesting to see how this plays out.
I agree, and I think that perhaps we should stop supporting the at least those people that we pay, as such as athletes and the actors and actresses. We pay them to entertain us. And if they're going to come out against everything that this nation stands for, then the best thing for us to do is just totally quit supporting.
Well, again, as I've said, they are free to express their opinion. It is a free country. They're free to produce videos. They're not free to intimidate electors. I'm not going to go that far, but they are free to express their opinion, and we're free to decide whether or not we want to buy their CDs or download their audio or go to their movies or watch their television programs, right? So it's a two-way street. So they have the freedom, but we have the freedom to ignore them or to simply not buy their products. So, good point. Let's take a break. We've got a full bank of phone calls. I'm going to give as many of you a chance to express your opinion, pro or con. 1-800-351-1212. Got a little bit more information, as always, on our website, pointofview.net. We'll come back with some more of your calls right after these important messages. Stay tuned.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
This is Christmas week, and I thought it might be worthwhile to spend a moment to reflect on the words of the hymn, O Little Town of Bethlehem. It was written in 1867 by Philip Brooks, an Episcopal pastor from Philadelphia. He was in Israel 2 years earlier and had celebrated Christmas in Bethlehem, and he wrote this song to reflect on what that night of the birth of Jesus might be like. O little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. Above thy deep and dreamless sleep the silent stars go by. Yet in the dark streets shineth the everlasting light. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. You know, while the streets of our cities are quiet on Christmas Day, most likely that day was just like any other day for the people in Bethlehem. But as evening came, the town grew quiet, and something remarkable took place. In the second verse, the hymn says, While mortals sleep, the angels keep their watch of wondering love. Just like today, our world goes about its business, usually oblivious to the spiritual realities around it. Jesus came into the world quietly. Yes, there was the angelic announcement to the shepherds, but most other people were unaware of the fact that the most significant event in history was taking place. God became man. But he was born in a stable and laid in a feeding trough. There was no pomp or circumstance as you might expect of a king. Jesus came not only to live among us, but to ultimately die for our sins. He took upon himself the sins of the world, your sins and my sins, and paid the ultimate penalty that we deserve to pay that we might have everlasting life. During this Christmas week, I hope you'll stop long enough to consider what happened in that little town of Bethlehem. But even more so, I hope you will think about what Jesus did for you on Calvary. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to Arizona. Jenny, thank you for calling today here on Point of View.
Hi, thanks for taking the call. I have several short comments, and the first one has to do with that the country was founded Judeo-Christian heritage. I think the founding fathers were guided, and that's why they set up the Electoral College, and that was one. And so I think it's a worthwhile organization to still have.
Sure.
Now, number two is there's a lot of people hand-wringing and stuff, and I think we all need to remember that God is not surprised. And then another one is that two of the callers were talking about, one of them was talking about the Democrats whining and complaining. Well, yesterday I remember the president-elect doing a lot of whining and complaining. And
yeah, he sure did.
Doing too. And so, I think the Democrats have got just as much right to complain as anybody else. And then I think we need to remember that, like, soft answer and all that stuff, because one of your previous callers not too long ago was calling the Democrats bottom feeders. And so I think that I know it's really hard to just get over it, but the systems are in place and God knows about it, and so we can't just relax because there is a lot of upheaval that we need to stay aware of and stay on top of and keep mindful of. But I think that God's not surprised.
Yep, that is certainly good. Jenny, you got some good points there. And thank you for being so organized, having 1, 2, 3. So it's really easy to follow. And, we really do need to try to provide some peace. I've got a piece that I've got coming out in the future in which, the word love has been so redefined. It means so many things to so many people. But, whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian, whether you're a liberal or conservative, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, if we can be some peacemakers in the midst of all this conflict, I don't know how, given the fact that people are getting death threats and harassing phone calls and hateful email, but nevertheless, I hope that we can be. And so, Jenny, I appreciate your comments there, and I want to just keep moving because we have so many phone calls. Matter of fact, a full bank of phone calls here. So as a caller drops off, you can try to get through and share your comments. Let's go to Georgia again, and in this case, we'll talk to Roy. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Howdy.
Howdy.
I normally just listen, but my skin crawled a little bit when one of the callers said, I don't understand how a Christian could vote for Donald Trump. I just couldn't sit still. I happen to be a Christian, and am old enough to have experienced in the past always voting for a candidate I could be totally supportive of. We've not been here before, like so many other people. But I teach a senior citizens class, Bible study, and I heard a lot of them saying they couldn't vote for Donald Trump, so I had a little illustration in the Sunday school class, and as a result, a lot of lights went on in their eyes and their minds, so I thought I would just share it with that caller also.
Sure.
I don't know his name or state. I had two of the class members come up, and they represented the two candidates, and I said, all of you don't like this guy at all, and you know that he always chooses everything wrong and won't stand up for anything that you believe in, but he's running for office, and here's another person. You don't really like him either, but he occasionally does things that you support, and he's the only other candidate in the election. Now, three people came up. I haven't physically come up, and one of them was the guy's wife, and I said, this lady here is going to vote for him because it's his wife. And I heard her stand over next to him, and then the other two said, now, the other two are talking about going home without voting. I said, when it's all over with, who's going to get the most votes? And all of a sudden they said, well, he is. He's going to win 1-0.
Yep, that's right.
I said, now he's the president. Mm-hmm. Are you happy with that? They said, no. I said, well, how about the two of you vote for this person over here?
Sometimes you have to make it that simple.
Yeah, it really is.
And the other one I used to say is a lot of times people say, well, I just don't like him. And there are just so many things about Donald Trump that repel all of us. So I got that. But I also used an illustration that sometimes we like a team, but we don't like the coach. We like a team. We don't like the owner. I mean, I went to a Mavericks game the other night. Do you think Mark Cuban is on my list of most, admired people in America right now? No. I watched the Cowboys last night. Do you think that, I really like Jerry Jones that much? No, but I like the team. So, as I've also said, some of the people that have been put on this particular team are amazing. Matter of fact, we were supposed to have Ryan Zinke on today, and of course he's now been tapped as the Interior Secretary, so I guess we're not going to change that. And all the way down from Mike Pence all the way down, Ben Carson. I'm not real thrilled about the coach, but boy, I sure like the team he's putting together right now, at least most of his team. There are one or two that we've got some questions about, so that's another way to think about it as well.
Well, that's just it. We as Christians are taught by the Scripture to use discernment and to think. And I think so many well-meaning Christians have gotten so blinded that they just don't think critically about the consequences of what they do or don't do. And David Barton, who I heard speak years ago, made the statement, the opposition is willing to win the battles one at a time so they win the war. And Christians aren't willing to play unless they win the war.
That's right. And sometimes if we win, we go home because we say, well, our guy's in. And if we lose, we go home because we said we lost. So either way, we just get uninvolved. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen in my whole life.
Well, it is. And I said my skin just crawled when I heard that again. I just had to call. So I'll let you get out of the way. But I just wish Christians could think critically.
Well, Roy, I appreciate you calling in, and thank you for the service that you're doing there at that senior center. And I just mentioned in passing, we were supposed to have Ryan Zinke with us today, individual who is a member of Congress from Montana and is the author of the book American Commander. By the way, if you loved American Sniper, you will love this new book, American Commander. And we were supposed to have him on today to talk about his book. Well, then Donald Trump messed up my life, and that is he tapped him as Interior Secretary. So he's not doing interviews right now, which I can understand since he's now going to go before the United States Senate to be confirmed as Interior Secretary. So that's one of those things that just sort of happened. But we have, in many cases, interviewed many of the individuals that will be on Donald Trump's cabinet. And there's a few that I go, okay, I wouldn't have picked him. But there are many others that I just say, I think that was a really good choice. And so it's another way to think about this. You may not like the coach, but you like the team. You may not like the owner, but you like the team. And that's the circumstance we have here. Do we think that everything Donald Trump has said is admirable? Of course not. I don't even. A few more phone calls. Let's stay in Georgia for another minute here, and we'll go to another caller, Bob. Bob, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, how are you?
What would you like to add?
I just want to make sure I understand. Now, is there a possibility that they're going to discount the election and we're going to have to start all over, or what happens if that happens? Does Obama remain president, or do we have another election, or what's going to happen?
That's a good question. You know, I imagine with all this confusion, a lot of people want to know, okay, what's happening here? Okay, today, the electors from the various states, and of course, you're in the state of Georgia, so we can talk about that one, or Texas, or California, or Mississippi, Alabama, where you happen to be. And those electors went to your state capital today, or will go. Some of them haven't quite met yet. I know the ones in Sacramento are just meeting a little bit later. And Alaska will be meeting later because they're further time zone. But as they all then vote, then there should be more than 270 electoral votes for Donald Trump, and that will be it. Let's ask the question that you're asking. What if somehow there are a lot more electors who decided they were not going to vote for Donald Trump, and so they didn't vote for Hillary Clinton because she didn't get 270 votes, but they didn't vote for Donald Trump, and he didn't get 270 electoral votes. Well, then what happens then? Well, then they go to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives essentially would ratify the vote for Donald Trump, since each state gets one vote. There are 50 states, and there are more states, many more states, that have Republican representation than Democratic representation, so they would actually elect Donald Trump. And then by the end of that week, which would be Friday, January 6th at 1 p.m., when the members of the House and Senate convene together, they would actually count the electoral votes and see that they weren't enough. Or maybe they would do that earlier then because of this situation, and then actually ratify the fact that Donald Trump will be president. So we don't have to re-vote again, and we don't have the possibility that Hillary Clinton will be the next president. And after today, I suspect most of this will be nothing more than a footnote in history. But this concern that I have in the future is we have never had a time in which you have had the members of the Electoral College who have been inundated by harassing phone calls, hate mail, and death threats. So this is something that is unprecedented. If you're learning some things today, let me just also mention that we encourage you to, between now and the end of the year, to support Point of View. We'll be back right after this.
More than 2,000 years ago, God entered the world through his Messiah. And today he calls us to be the light of the world, to reflect his grace and truth to everyone around us. Your support for Point of View can equip more than 1 million people to be the light. And we have a way right now to double the brightness of every dollar you give, up to $70,000. You know what that means. If you give $50, it means $100 to Point of View. Every gift gets doubled, whether it's $20 or $20,000. Make that gift now. Shine your light. Click the banner at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151 or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Be the light, and let our matching fund double your shining. Pointofview.net, Box 30, Dallas 75221, and 1-800-347-5151. Thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about the Electoral College, I think some of you would also like to address whether or not we should continue using this particular system that was written into the Constitution. So let's take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll head first to Indiana. Susie, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
I certainly can. I'd love to hear your comments.
Well, I thank you very much for your show. We appreciate it. We drive from Tennessee back to Indiana. My question is, you know how old that the electoral vote was put in place? Quite some time ago.
Sure. And it was something that was needed maybe in the 18th and early part of the 19th century. We're a little more mobile today and have a little better communications, but I still think the concept was a good one. That is to force the presidents to the presidential candidates to actually represent the entire nation rather than just going to Boston and New York and Philadelphia and some places in the 18th century, or even today, going to New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Philadelphia, Charlotte, San Diego, or something like that. I mean, in some respects, it spreads it out, but there's a case to be made on either side about keeping it or getting rid of it. And I think you've got some questions about getting rid of it, right?
I do. I think the popular vote is more of the present time. I don't agree with electoral vote, and it seems like if people go out to vote, that we're happy for that. For instance, I'm making a point. Indianapolis is the 12th largest city in the United States, and I don't think the electoral numbers match up with a population, as you were talking about back with New York City or Philadelphia or Boston back in the 1800s. So I'm not sure. I don't like to use Donald Trump's word about the election being, when he was beginning to call Hillary, it was swayed. It's going to be a crooked vote or whatever.
A rigged,
and
yeah.
I'm concerned about, the way it is today. And I think if the people have voted the popular vote, that means the people. That means count by count. And as you were talking about, to go to the Electoral College or go to the electors and so forth and get information on what to do, I don't think that many people do that.
Right. Well, and again, the argument for the popular vote, as you just accurately have said, is to really have every person's vote count. What would happen is we would know that, let's just take this last election, Hillary Clinton would spend a lot more time in New York City and in Los Angeles and Chicago and places like that. Donald Trump would probably spend more time in San Antonio and Charlotte and Phoenix and other places because the population centers would be key. And as a result, those of you that are listening in places like Michigan, Wisconsin, certainly Iowa, even Ohio, might be ignored in ways that you haven't in the past. So there are, again, good arguments both ways, but certainly a lot of people say, as we've heard at least one or two callers say today, I thought my vote counted. Why all of a sudden are we talking about some of these individuals now voting today that could actually change the way I and my state voted? So you've got a good point. And Susie, I really appreciate you calling in today on Point of View.
Well, I thank you very much. And good luck with the rest of the time and show there.
Yes. Well, let's take some more phone calls because a few of you would like to address that issue. So let's go to the state of Georgia once again. And Charles, thank you for joining our conversation.
Hey, thank you. Well, she pretty much covered what I was going to say. But, when you say every vote counts, today, you show me one election, an individual who did not vote. If they had voted, it would have made a difference. It doesn't happen. But on the electoral vote, if they can change their votes like they're going to do, then it definitely does make a difference.
Right.
But what scares me is how we're looking at a possibility right now that the election will be overthrown just due to people making threats and all. And that's a scary thing to be looking at like that.
Well, and again, I think this is, if nothing else, we should pray for the 538 individuals that are electors, because they are, or at least some of them, not all of them, but some of them are really facing an incredible amount of pressure. And this is not something we should put to our commentator, these various individuals that are electors and things like that. And, back to our vote counts, you've heard me on many occasions share some of my commentaries. Some of these elections have been so close that they've been tie elections, or others where it's been an individual's been elected by less than one vote per precinct, going all the way back to 1960. 1976, and how about the year 2000 when it was 538 votes in Florida that elected George W. Bush over Al Gore. So your vote counts, but again, a lot of people said, I thought we were going to vote directly for the president. The framers decided not to do that. I think it had a lot of wisdom at the time. I still think it has a fair amount of wisdom because, as I said, if you change the way in which we are electing people right now, let's say we remove the Electoral College, or more and more states are starting to say that they're going to send the electors to their state particular capital based upon who was voted in terms of the popular electing. Then in some respects, whether we have a constitutional amendment that changes it or whether states change it, or some states no longer have a winner-take-all situation, it's going to be a lot different. But if it is, then prepare yourself for the fact that the presidential candidates in the future will go to places like New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and Houston and Dallas and Philadelphia and Boston and Phoenix and Charlotte and San Jose and San Diego and San Antonio. And if you don't live in one of those particular cities, you're probably out of luck because that's where all the very dense number of votes are. And if you live in a place like Montana or Wyoming, or even up until recently, how important Iowa and Ohio and some of these states were, you might just be completely ignored because they're going to go where the population centers are greatest and where the possibility of getting the most number of votes in the smallest amount of time might take place. So we'll see how that plays out. Well, let's take some more phone calls. Go to the state of Texas this time. And Linda, thank you for joining our conversation.
Oh, thank you for taking my call. Everything that I really wanted to know has already been answered, but it makes me ashamed as a Christian that this mess that is going on with these electoral people, that's so ungodly. And probably it's not godly people that are doing the threats. At least we hope not. But it was really confusing to me at first that I thought once you voted, I'm 65 years old, and once you voted, then, because I was very proud to vote, and I still am, but it's now I thought, okay, somebody else could because of whatever may happen.
Sure. And you're in state of Texas today. People are voting. I think they've already voted by now. And 38 are supposed to vote for Donald Trump. And I think, if we've guessed right, 36 of the 38 will have voted for him. So your vote for Donald Trump counts. But again, if your vote for Hillary Clinton, that would not count because, again, in these states, it's a winner-take-all situation. So
that's really sad, though.
Which is, again, I think another, if I were to keep a tally sheet, I think you're on the we need a popular vote side of the equation, if I'm reading you right.
Yes, sir. I just, instead of a few people that could be swayed, and all of us have already voted, and a few people can go in there and say, well, we don't think he should be president or she should, so we don't want her.
Yeah, and we'll make the decision. Again, Linda, we react to that because we have the same situation which we have some of the liberal elites right now in the universities, sometimes in the media, and even in politics that sort of say, well, we know better than you what you need. And you're going, well, then why'd you ask me to vote in the first place? So I understand your argument. And again, it's one of those arguments that I think is going to be made a lot more now as people have become a lot more aware of the Electoral College. When this happened in 2000 and Al Gore won the popular vote, but just barely over George W. Bush, and it was really close, that started the momentum to change some of this. But this one, where the significant popular vote is much greater in the case of Hillary Clinton compared to Donald Trump, and yet, again, he will probably be elected by the electoral vote, and all of the harassing emails, phone calls, hate mail, and death threats, I think might cause some people to rethink the Electoral College. And so your comment is right on target with what I think a lot of people are thinking right now. Let's take a break. We'll come back and take some more phone calls. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Smithsonian Institution has appointed its first curator of religion in over 100 years. Peter Manseau, the new curator, explains that you can't tell the story of America without the role of religion in it. According to Manseau, among the first exhibits to be displayed will be a church bell crafted by Paul Revere, Thomas Jefferson's Bible that cut out the portions he did not believe, a manuscript from the Book of Mormon, a Muslim text that once belonged to an African slave, and even a Torah scroll damaged by Hessians during the War for Independence. Manseau also intends to display a compass used by Roger Williams to find his way to Rhode Island when he was exiled from Massachusetts for his religious beliefs, a display that Manseau hopes will help Americans ponder what religious liberty looked like in the context of the founding of our country. The new curator is right. You cannot tell the story of America without telling the role religion has played in making our country what it is today. And that includes the role of religious liberty. These artifacts from our history point to the real stories of Americans committed to the historically radical idea that government respect a person's right to honor his conscience before God. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, but again, let me just mention that today the electors meet in the various state capitals. Most have already met. Some are still going to meet, depending on, of course, what time they get together and where we are on that particular time zone. Those of you listening to this on tape delay, this will already have taken place, but as we're broadcasting live, this will take place, and then it will be ratified Friday, January 6th, when the House and Senate meet in a joint session, and it is actually convened by the departing president of the Senate, who's Vice President Joe Biden. They will actually announce the state votes, and he will then declare the winner. Some of you are saying, well, where did this come from? Well, it's actually in Article 2 of the Constitution. So you can go all the way back to 1787. But then you also have the other question that was raised, and that is, what if you don't get the requisite number of electoral votes? You would need 270 to be the next president. Donald Trump supposedly has 306, although we've just pointed out that some of the electors are not going to vote for him. But that's all then determined by the 12th Amendment, which was added later after the 10 amendments known as the Bill of Rights. But this has been in process for some time. But I also recognize that for some of you, it's kind of new material. So that's why I'm glad we're covering it today here on Point of View. Let's, if we can, go to New Mexico this time. KPCL. And Tony, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. What would you like to add to our conversation?
I'm not sure why we should consider a popular vote when there is so much organized massive voter fraud. There's reports that there's 3 million illegal non-citizen votes across the country.
And now some have said it's 2 million, but still, your point's well taken. Your point is well taken. Yes, I agree.
Then there's another one that says with the dead people voting, multiple people voting in multiple polling places, the made-up people and stuff, there's close to 18 million across the nation. But if you eliminate all that, Hillary would have lost big time. I don't mean to sound like Trump, but it's a big difference there.
But let's stay on your big point. Let's stay on your big point for just a minute, and that is the question of voter fraud, because we don't have a national election. We have a number of state elections that elect a national leader, the president. And there is a much better chance when you have an electoral college system for each state to address the issue of voter fraud. Some states do better than others. But let's go to the other issue. If you then make your point about this idea of a popular vote. One of the largest cities, in addition to New York and Los Angeles and Chicago, is Philadelphia. Well, that's a place where there seems to be, I think you can make a pretty good case that there has been quite a bit of voter fraud in Philadelphia. And so if you start having a lot of voter fraud and you're using just the popular vote, then that issue that we've talked about on this program so often that up until fairly recently, Democrats generally have ignored, and now are talking about rigged elections and hacking and fraud a little bit, not a lot, but at least a little bit, that becomes front and center. So, Tony, your argument is a really powerful argument for keeping the Electoral College, I would think.
I have a solution that we purge all the voter registration across the nation, require everybody to re-register, requiring, as with most government programs, your ID of one form or another, birth certificate, social security card, and a fingerprint. When you go to vote or register to vote, if you're already registered to vote in another precinct, it'll go into the national database and go back to purge your previous registration. Once you vote with your fingerprint, and your ID is clicked in, and you cannot vote twice.
Sure.
Dead people can't vote unless they have a fingerprint.
And I don't know if we have to go that far, or that you have, something on your back of your hand, your forehead. I mean, I'm being facetious here, but to emphasize that real quickly, because I want to get on to some other phone calls. There are some things that I think we can and should do. And the biggest problem is that, as we have talked about on this program so often, with some of the experts on the issue of voter fraud, it is always resisted, and this current administration has probably done more to resist any attempts to have voter ID and to have actually clean voter rolls. And as I've said before, we would not put up with this kind of incompetence when it comes to our money. As I've said before, you can go to any bank, you can go to any ATM machine in the world and be assured that you're getting your money out. And if there's any problem, you can be sued. And if there is too much incompetence, you can put people in jail for mishandling those kinds of funds. But when it comes to our vote, we just simply tolerate all sorts of incompetence and duplication and allow people that are not eligible to vote to go in and vote. We allow people to vote twice and all the things that you talked about. So, Tony, again, you're on a very important point that needs to be made again and again. Let's go to Arizona and talk to Wayne in KNLB. Thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
I have a very simple I will not vote for anyone knowingly that supports abortion. No ands, ifs, or buts.
I think that's good enough. Yeah.
To do so would put blood on my hands.
I would agree. That's one of those issues where it may not be a qualification for electing an individual, but it's a good disqualification. And so I certainly agree with you. Let me take at least one or two more phone calls real quickly. We'll go out to North Carolina. We were talking about voter fraud. And Billy, I think you wanted to address that issue.
Yes, sir. Well, actually, the caller before the last one hit it right on the head. We have to do everything possible to prevent voter fraud, especially if we're going to have a popular vote election. And I don't want large populated cities dictating the outcome of an election. I mean, we see right here in Charlotte, North Carolina, what a bunch of doggone perverted people who elected a lesbian as mayor, for goodness sakes. And then
yeah, look at who you have in Charlotte. Look who you have in Houston. I just mentioned some of those population centers: New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Philadelphia, Charlotte, Boston. I mean, you are basically saying that it will be much more difficult for the sort of pro-life, pro-family, traditional marriage type of people to be elected if indeed you then focus all your time and attention on some of those cities. So, Billy, you've got a good point, and I wish I had time for all the callers, but we're out of time. So we did want to, on this special day, December 19th, once again alert you to the Electoral College vote that has been taking place today or has already taken place. And please take the time to watch the news tonight and see what you find out in terms of what happened at your own state. And we'll see tomorrow if there are any kind of indications. The formal decisions and final announcement will take place on Friday, January 6th. Let me just mention before we run out of time today that we are certainly encouraging you between now and the end of the year to support this ministry. And if today you learned a few things about the Electoral College, about how many of these electors are being harassed and even inundated with phone calls and hate mail and death threats, could you maybe consider what you might do to support this ministry? As I've mentioned before, we have a matching grant, which is now up to $70,000. So that means your gift of $50 becomes $100. Your gift of $200 becomes $400. So if you can, even as we're going off the air, go to our website, pointofview.net. Click on that button that says, Be the Light to Our World. Your gift will be doubled, and we would greatly appreciate this. We try to educate you every single day, and all through this week, we're doing live broadcasts so that we can educate you, equip you, and empower you to make a difference. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
More than 2,000 years ago, God entered the world through his Messiah. And today he calls us to be the light of the world, to reflect his grace and truth to everyone around us. Your support for Point of View can equip more than 1 million people to be the light. And we have a way right now to double the brightness of every dollar you give, up to $70,000. You know what that means. If you give $50, it means $100 to Point of View. Every gift gets doubled, whether it's $20 or $20,000. Make that gift now. Shine your light. Click the banner at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151 or mail your donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Be the light and let our matching fund double your shining. Pointofview.net, Box 30, Dallas 75221, and 1-800-347-5151. Thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.